I'm Jenna Miscavige. I was born and raised in Scientology. I left when I was 21 years old and wrote a book about it. My uncle, David Miscavige, is the leader of Scientology, and this is my YouTube channel. Hi, so today I wanted to talk about something that I believe sets Scientology apart, which is the way that it separates children from their parents from a young age. And this is something that polygamous cults or other cults, it is usually encouraged, families are encouraged because they see this as a recruiting pool for their organization. And this is something that Scientology does that is extremely destructive and hurtful. And I want to talk about that today, which is separating children from their parents. So to give a little bit of background information, I was born and raised in Scientology. When I was 2 years old, my parents joined the C organization, which is Scientology's most dedicated group. They work for Scientology. They work 7 days a week. They work 15-hour days. They sign 1 billion year contracts, which basically means they're pledging their soul lifetime after lifetime to Scientology. They basically agree not to have children. That rule came to be after I was already born. But now if someone joins the Sea Org, they agree not to have children. And they basically wear military uniforms. They live on church property. They eat on church property. And they basically have almost no free time whatsoever. And so it is a very extreme organization. And my parents joined this group when I was 2 years old, and they moved to Los Angeles, California. So when we first moved there, I lived in a small apartment with my parents, and I would see them every day. I spent most of my time in the nursery, but I would at least see them like after dinner and in the mornings. But basically, children of Sea Org members are considered to be Sea Org members in training, called cadets. So the nursery is basically a place where you go during the day, but you're learning about becoming a Sea Org member. This is from 1989, when I would have been 4 years old, and we were in the Cadet Estates organization. And so a cadet is just somebody who's training to be a Sea Org member. And just this language, Jenna Miscavige is hereby acknowledged for their good production as a student this week. And I just thought that this was a good example showing that this was what we were expected to be a part of. We weren't treated like children. We were treated like we were in a training pool. So my parents joined when I was 2, but almost immediately my mom was gone. She was in Curacao in the Caribbean, and she was working on a Scientology renovations project of one of their ships called the Freewinds. And the Freewinds was a special project where Scientology's highest levels are delivered on that ship. And so I would see her just every few months, where at least for a while I was still seeing my dad every day when I wasn't at the nursery. Although it still wasn't very often, but I would at least still see him every night. But by the time I was 4 years old, I remained in the Los Angeles area, and my parents went up to San Bernardino in Riverside and in Hemet, where the international management base for Scientology was located. They were international Scientology executives, and their new positions required them to be on that base. However, since the location of that base was considered a secret, and because it was so important, you had to get special clearances to go up there. So you had to get a certain level of interrogation. You had to get certain approvals. You had to prove yourself to be ethical, productive, and basically towing the line enough where it's okay for you to know where this secret location was. And I, as a child, there's basically nowhere for the kids to be there or to be taken care of. So we were separated by like just about like 100 miles. So it was like a 2-hour drive either way. And so my parents would drive down on Saturday night, and they would usually get there at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and then they would have to leave again by 11 a.m. And this was the only time I would see them during the week. And they also would not come down every week. It was every other week. And so at the time, I lived in an apartment with a girl who basically, I spent most of my time at the nursery, but then there was a girl they had come pick me up in the evening at about midnight, bring me to the apartment, sleep with me there. She was like sort of like my guardian. And then she would put me on the school bus back to the nursery in the morning. Um, so even just from when I was 4 years old, I was separated from my parents completely. At about this same time, a rule came out in the Sea Organization where Sea Org members were not allowed to have children anymore. And so it's just a good example of how children were starting to be seen as a problem in the Sea Org, as something that required extra effort on the Sea Org's part to take care of them. And so basically they put an end to that, and nobody in the Sea Org was allowed to have children anymore. Just a little bit after I turned 6 years old, like a month or so, I was told that I was going to be brought to the ranch. It's called the International Ranch, and it is behind the Saboba Indian Reservation in San Jacinto. And this was about 20 minutes from the base where my parents worked. And this was going to be the place where children of Sea Org members who work at the International Management Base were going to be kept and schooled and taken care of. So instead of actually me moving into my parents' apartment when I was up there, we were put at this boarding school of sorts where we were sort of separated from the rest of the world. Like we just didn't see anybody who wasn't a Sea Org member or who wasn't another kid of a Sea Org member. So we stayed at this ranch all week, and where we did labor, we did some schooling, we did some Scientology studies, and all of those details are going to be for another video because I'm just trying to concentrate on the separation from our parents. So we would see our parents. We would be bused to their apartments, or on the rare occasion that your parent had a car, which was maybe just a couple of people. We would be bused to their apartments at about 10 p.m. on Saturday night, where the kids would stay in the apartment and wait for their parents to come home, which was usually at about midnight. And then basically they would have until about 11:30 the next morning to spend with them, at which point they would be bused back to the ranch, this boarding school, and their parents would have to return to work. And during these few hours in the morning where they could see their parents were required to be cleaning their berthing. And so it wasn't really even dedicated parent-child time. It was supposed to be when they were cleaning, and often the kids would have to help their parents clean, and this was the only time that they could spend with them. So for me, I spent this time mostly with my dad, where he would make me breakfast, and occasionally, if I needed something, we would go to Walmart and he would get me socks. Now, keep in mind, my dad was only getting paid $50 a week, and so all of this would have to come out of his pay. Um, and so, yeah, it was really the only time I would see him, and I just remember crying every time he drove me back to the ranch and being really upset about it. And this was sort of compounded by the fact that my mom was always being sent by the Sea Org to do special projects in locations where I was not at. So most of the time when I was at the ranch, she was in Los Angeles doing renovations at the Scientology Celebrity Center, making this nice, beautiful, fancy church building for celebrities, this gorgeous hotel, while her own kid was at a boarding school, not seeing her doing manual labor. And then after the renovations of the Celebrity Center were complete, she was then moved to Clearwater, Florida to do a bunch of renovations there. And so just these few hours that we got to spend with our parents, it was just with my dad and not with my mom. While we were at the ranch, our only form of communication with our parents was two things. Well, one, it was seeing them once a week, but two, it was via letter through Scientology's mail pack, which was basically there would be a van that would go from the ranch to the base every day, and they would bring letters we would write back and forth to and from our parents and other like church related communication. And so that was the only way we could speak to our parents. On rare occasions, I was allowed to speak to my mom on the phone because she was in another state, but it really wasn't more than once a week. And so every Thursday, we were required to write a weekly report to our parents where it was basically a form that we would fill out, which was like, it basically said, I completed blank study courses, and it would be like, I learned blank this week. And then they would stack these all up in a stack, and then the teacher would look at them and would basically send them to our parents. Now, we knew that the teacher could see these letters, and so it's not like we would write anything that was worrying us or that we were upset about. In fact, all letters from the mail pack were read. I have some examples here. So, this is how things were routed. This was from a friend that was in Clearwater. And you can see I opened it here, but this has been previously opened and taped. So everything was open and read to make sure that nobody was saying bad things about Scientology or the Sea Org. This is another example of a letter that was written to me. And you can see right here, it's been opened, and here's a staple. You can even see here that it says via mail pack, but it's another example right here of it being opened and then stapled. My point is that there was never allowed to be open communication between us and our parents. There were almost never phone calls, so there was no way for us to say, this isn't right, or I don't like this about it, or I'm having a hard time with this schooling, or even like, just for instance, if you got sick and like that wasn't something that our parents were told about. It wasn't something that we were taken to the doctor for. I never once went to the doctor when I was at the ranch, with one exception, which is when I was supposed to do Scientology's purification rundown. And I just got a physical. That was the only time I ever went to the doctor from the ages of 6 until 12 years old. So our parents weren't informed when we were sick. And even if they were, like, for instance, I could write a letter to my mom and say, oh, I was sick, but I was probably better by the time she got it, especially since she was in Florida and I was in California. This is an example of a letter from my mom to me at that time. And I'm just going to read it because it says, Dear Baby Cakes, hello, I heard you were in ISO. ISO is short for isolation, which is where they put sick kids so that they don't make other kids sick. And this is true for all of the Sea Org. So any Sea Org member who's sick, they go into ISO, isolation, so that other people don't get sick. So this is a letter from my mom that was sent via the mail pack, which would take at least 2 days for my letter. This is in response to my letter. So by the time it would get back to me, I mean, it's been a week since I sent it. So it says, hello, I heard you were in ISO. Poor baby. Are you okay? I tried calling you twice now. So she tried calling me, couldn't get a hold of me twice. I'll keep calling. Here's your picture frame with your new glass. Be careful with it. She's sending me a picture of herself because basically I never see her. But if it breaks again, that's okay. Just let me know. I love you. Much love, Biddy. So, it's just an example of a parent not actually knowing when their kid is sick. and not having somebody there to advocate for you as a child, which would be something your parent would do. So just another example of things that I've only come to learn now that I myself am a mom, how much work goes into this as a parent and how important it is in a kid's life. But things like losing our teeth, and like having a tooth fairy, it just wasn't a thing at all. Or on our birthdays, like we wouldn't see our parents unless it happened to fall on the day that our parents, like the day that we would normally see our parents. So basically, like your parents would have to pay $20 for you to get a cake, which you would share with all of the other kids at the ranch. But everything was like business as normal. I mean, you would work, you would do your studies, and you would not see your parent on your birthday. This is an example of a letter I wrote to my mom. This would have been when I was 10 years old, and it's through the mail pack. You can see it's routed to her in Clearwater, Florida. And this is the type of letter I would send. Dear Mom, this week I completed grammar and communication. That's a Scientology introductory course. My stats are up. That means the work I did was more than the week I did before. Thank you so much for the presents. I like them. Much love, Jenna. I love you. So that's the type of communication we were having with our parents. My stats are up. I completed this course, etc. I also wanted to read another letter from my mom. And this is from when she was away in Florida when I was at the ranch, and I wouldn't see her for sometimes 6 months at a time. And even then I would just see her for like 1 day or 2 days when I would see her on the weekend, and then she would go away again doing her work for Scientology. And I just wanted to read this letter because I feel like it highlights a little bit of how little I knew about where she lived, and just sort of how it felt to be separated from your parent and be separated from your kid all the time. So I'm just going to show you the letter. This one is typed, but there's a little letter from my mom that says, Jenna, here you go, sweetheart. It says, Dear Jenna, thank you very much for your letter. I just got it today, and I was very happy to receive it. The paper you're writing on looks like special printing paper that people use to learn how to print better. And I can tell from your handwriting that you're definitely learning to print better, which is good. I will definitely call you sometime this week, and I'll have Allison, that was her assistant, help me do it since she is here. So that's just highlighting that I didn't speak to my mom more than once a week or more. I'm glad that Sarah Kitty was our cat, but it lived at my dad's apartment. So I only saw her once a week too. I'm glad that Sarah Kitty is doing well. I sometimes worry that she doesn't have anyone to play with since I'm not there, but I'm sure that you and Jay Birdie play with her on the weekends. Jay Birdie is my brother Justin. That's what I called him. So that is good. Does she still like her grass that you guys grew for her? Does she need any more of it? I was really surprised when you wrote in your letter that Sterling is only 1 inch shorter than Justin. That means Sterling must have grown a whole bunch, which is really good. Sterling is my other brother, and this just also illustrates that she hadn't seen them in a long time too, to know how they're growing. What kind of haircuts did they cut? So I guess I told her that they got a haircut. Did Justin get the same kind of haircut that he had last time, where his sideburns were really short and the top part is long? I was looking at a magazine the other day and I saw a hairstyle actually that would look very nice on you. You need to grow your hair out so it reaches your shoulders, including your bangs in front. At that point, we can get it styled at a beauty shop and it will look very beautiful. I was thinking you could grow your hair to your shoulder and then you can have long bangs and push your hair all the way back, and that would look very beautiful. I feel like she's trying to convince me to get a mullet. Joking. Not good timing though. Also, when it's that long, you'll be able to do special braids in it, which Sarah, your aunt, knows how to do, and she can teach us so that it will be very comfortable for you. I think that this part, like, sort of illustrates her wanting to be a mom and and missing me. And my mom grew up in a similar way to me. So it's just all kind of a little bit sad. You asked me if I live in an apartment, and yes, I do. It's called the Hacienda Gardens, and I live in a room in an apartment at the Hacienda. And in the next couple of days, Allison will probably move into the same apartment with me, so I won't be there alone. The apartment is very pretty and is renovated, and I can have Allison take some photos of it and send it to you. Allison is her assistant. But again, this is just showing that my mom, like, I've never even been to my mom's apartment, and obviously I don't live there with her. I can also have her take some photos of the office I work in, which is also very nice. We just got that renovated as well, and you'll be able to see this. So there's one good thing about being in Florida is that I do have a nice place to sleep and a nice place to work. But I would give all that away just if I could be with you. Maybe when you go to New Hampshire, you can stop back here on your way and see me for a couple days. The one family time off I got from when I was 6 until I was 12 was to go on a trip to Philly and New Hampshire for my great-grandparents' like 60th wedding anniversary. I don't really know if it was 60th or 30th. And she was saying that maybe I could stop by Florida and see her. That would be really nice. I don't think you've ever been to Florida, but Justin was born in Florida, so he could come too and see all the places he used to go when he was little. I hate to tell you, but I will probably be here for a bit longer, maybe even months. But I will set up a line so I can talk to you several times a week at the ranch. In other words, I will call you there. I can also set up that sometimes during these few months that I will be out here, that I will be able to come up and see you, fly on an airplane at the ranch every once in a while. So just so it's clear, that had not been happening previously. I just wasn't seeing her. And I also was barely getting calls from her. Also, like I said earlier, maybe we can also arrange it so you can stop here on your way from New Hampshire. This way, we'll be able to see each other and it won't be bad. I miss you very, very much, and I love you even more. I do look at your photos and I do read your letters, as they mean more to me than anything. However, I know that you understand that it's important. However, I know that you understand that I have some very important work here, and therefore it is important that I stay and do it. In the meantime, please let me know if you need anything or want anything, and I can definitely go to the store and get you some things if you need them. I will write you again in a couple of days, and I would love to get a letter from you. Please tell Jay Birdie I love him very much too, and that I would also like to get a letter from him. I just thought that that letter was a good illustration of how parents are separated from their kids, or kids are separated from their parents, and we're sort of taught to believe from a really young age that this is normal, and it's because our parents are doing really important work, and that we would in some way be a distraction to them. And yeah. This familial separation goes beyond just parents and children. I mean, I never actually lived in a house with my brothers. And when my brother graduated from the ranch, I basically didn't see him at all. I didn't even see him on Sunday morning when I would see my parents. So only if I was working on the int base, which was something that, like, sometimes the kids would get brought there to work in the galley to make food for people. But that was something that happened like once every few months. And so I just basically wouldn't be able to see my brother at all. And this is a letter from my brother. That shows this. It says, "Dear Beanbag," people would call me Jenna Bean, and then Jenna Beanbag, whatever, when I was a kid. I think that is what some call you, is it not? Though in any case, hello. I'm writing you from the kindness of my brotherly heart. Are you doing good? You're staying out of trouble, right? If you don't already know, I finished my EPF. That's basically where it's the Estates Project Force, and it's basically what do you call it? Oh, it's like an initiation program for the Sea Organization. So he was finished at the ranch learning everything he had to learn. And then now, in order to go into the Sea Org at the INT base, he had to do this program, which is heavy labor and finishing a bunch of courses. So he says, if you don't already know, I finished my EPF and I'm in the film lab. He worked in the film lab where they make Scientology movies to recruit people into Scientology. I'm doing good, though I miss you too. One day I'll take a day off and we'll do something together. So that's about it for now. Write back and keep all the letters I give you. Love, your brother, Justin. So it's not like this letter is going out of its way to complain that, oh, we don't see each other, but it's actually like really sweet. It's saying, keep all the letters I send you. And hopefully one day we can get a day off together, which never happened. Sorry. When I read this, I just think of how much my son and daughter mean to each other, and how much, even sometimes, like when they're upset and my daughter like doesn't want to talk to me or just something like that, like her brother will still go in there and make her feel better because they will have each other for the rest of their lives, because nobody else will have lived in the same home and had the same childhood experience as your brother or your sister. And I just think that it's so sad how this relationship is just totally destroyed and means nothing in Scientology. When I was 7 years old, I was asked to sign the billion-year contract to be a Sea Org member. And I want to show this to you guys here. So this is the 1 billion year contract that all Sea Org members sign, and I signed this at 7 years old. It says, Sea Organization Contract of Employment. I, and then you fill out your name, do hereby agree to enter into employment with the Sea Organization, and being of sound mind, do fully realize and agree to abide by its purpose, which is to get ethics in on this planet and the universe, and fully, without reservation, subscribe to the discipline, mores, and conditions of this group, and pledge to abide by them. Therefore, I contract myself to the Sea Organization for the next billion years. Date, signed, witness, your signature. So this is something that I signed as a 7-year-old, and my parents were not present when I was signing this. My parents were not present to know if I needed to go to the doctor, if I needed medical help. They were not kept abreast of my studies or to making sure I had an education. They were just not responsible for me. When I was 12 years old, I was sent to Clearwater, Florida to train to have a position in the Sea Organization. So I was officially in the Sea Organization at this point. And basically, from when I was 12 years old until I was 24 years old, I never lived in the same state as my parents. So by the time I was 24, I'd left the Sea Org and Scientology. But, from when I was 12 years old to 18 years old, I was, of course, a kid, and I did not live in the same state as my parents. Most of that time, I was in Clearwater, Florida, 3,000 miles away from them. And my only way to get a hold of them was through the mail pack and writing letters. And much of that time, I was forbidden to write letters to my mother because she was on a special rehabilitation program. And occasionally I would get calls from my father, and he really wanted me to call him all the time, but I would get in trouble for calling him. In fact, my aunt, Shelley Miscavige, who is married to my uncle, David Miscavige, who's the leader of Scientology, personally forbade me and got me into trouble for calling my parents. She told me directly that I was the only one in the Sea organization who was allowed to make a phone call, who had been making a phone call to the INT base besides my uncle, David Miscavige. And she was reprimanding me for that, saying that it was out security and that people out security, it just means it was not good security wise because it could lead to people finding out where the INT base was, which was supposed to be a big secret that nobody was ever allowed to tell. So even phone calls were forbidden. So my dad wrote me constantly. He clearly missed me very much. And that was the only way I could speak to him was through letters. And I didn't even get letters from my mom, except on a few very rare occasions where I was handed the letters by a woman named Ann Rathbun, who was the senior most official on the base. And because my mom was in trouble and nobody was allowed to know about it because she had previously been a very senior executive, she basically made me read the letters in her office in front of her after she had already read it and made me give the letter back to her. And so, an urge that I had always had as a kid, because my only way of communicating with my parents was through letter, was to keep all my letters and keep it in my bottom drawer, keep it under my pillow. And not being able to do that was something that like really broke my heart at the time. Like it seems like a small thing, but just having to read the letter in front of her and not being able to have it and hold it and not even being able to like have my true reaction or feelings in private, but having to be face to face with a senior official and just not being able to reread it over and over, like that. I don't know. That's what people do. That's normal to reread something. And even just being able to do that would have made me be able to like fantasize about being with my mom, or I don't know, just given me some joy that was just completely robbed by Scientology for really no good reason at all. So between the time I was 12 years old and 18 years old, I saw my mom exactly one time, and it was for less than an hour. I did not see her any more than that. My dad, I saw him a couple times, and it was maybe for an hour at most each time. It was because he was in town in Clearwater, Florida to do some Scientology job that he had, and I saw him briefly at the end of the night, and there's just a couple other times that were just very brief. And believe me, it wasn't because he didn't want to see me. He constantly wrote to me all the time and told me he missed me and he wanted me to come back to California. And that was something that I didn't have control over, and neither did he. When I was 15 years old, I got in trouble for basically chit chatting during course time and flirting with a boy. And they wanted to put me They basically wanted to assign me to do heavy labor and get interrogated all day. And at the time, I refused to do it because I was very upset and I'd already had enough of that in my life, which is another story for another time. And basically, I tried to call my parents because it's not something I had ever done before, but I don't know, it was just my instinct that I wanted to do that, and I just wanted to almost, like, be a kid for once instead of being treated like an an adult in a small body, and what I mean by that is Scientology believes that you are a spiritual being who lives lifetime after lifetime and that we've lived for billions and billions of years, and so, even if you're a child, they believe that you are a billion-year-old being, and so they just think of you as an adult. They don't think of you as being a child and not having your brain fully developed and needing to be taken care of and nurtured, etc. And I thought of myself as an adult too, but for some reason at this time, the urge to just speak to my mom and dad just like took over. I hadn't seen them in years, and I tried to call them, and the person who was responsible for making sure people towed the line and didn't do things that were unethical was hanging up the phone. And I had to find the one phone where you could call out because basically how the phones were set up is that unless you had a phone code, you would only be on their internal phone system. This was in Clearwater, Florida. And so you had to have a special code, and like nobody had these codes except there was one phone that did. And so I went to that phone and the girl stood there and just kept hanging up. And then they started pulling me away from the phone, and it wound up being where 3 adult women were holding me down plus a male security guard. They were holding me down and physically preventing me from calling my parents. And this is when I was 15 years old. This is in Clearwater, Florida, and it happened at the Hacienda Gardens, which is the apartment building where Sea Org members live who are in Clearwater, Florida. And it wound up happening where my parents, like, because I had called the reception for where they worked, the receptionist had told them. The receptionist actually happened to be somebody who grew up at this ranch with me. And I think that she told them out of the kindness of her heart, and they wound up calling me back. And then because my parents were senior executives, I was allowed to talk to them, but it was very begrudging, and it was being monitored, and it was only for a few minutes, and there was nothing they could tell me other than that they love me and they just want me to do the program, and that they know I'm a good person, and they wanted me to do what Scientology wanted me to do. And they had been through hard things, and just that they love me. But this is an example of me having to physically fight and being physically held down from calling my parents as a minor in Scientology. In fact, a few days later, I saw my uncle, Dave, the leader of Scientology, and he saw me sitting in a room and he asked if I was in trouble. And I said yes. And I told him why, because he asked me why. And he said that what I did was disgusting. And he said, no more special treatment for me, which was his way of referencing me being able to call my parents at the int base. Then a few minutes later, my aunt, Shelley Miscavige, came in and told me that I was now under full-time interrogation and heavy labor. I was being watched day and night. Someone would sit outside my door while I slept. Somebody would follow me around all day and into the bathroom if I needed to go to the bathroom, because I could essentially not be trusted by them, and I was in trouble for this. And so this is an example of how it's not just the parents' fault. This is the leader of Scientology and his assistant and my uncle and my aunt directly enforcing the fact that I'm not allowed to communicate with my parents and directly punishing me for it. When I was 16 years old, I was still in Clearwater, Florida, and my parents were in California, and they had decided to leave the Sea Org and Scientology. And I was not told about this, but what did happen was that I was pulled in for interrogation by the highest, most official on the base. And when I wasn't getting interrogation, I was made to clean bathrooms with a toothbrush. And I wasn't allowed to speak to my parents at this time. I had no idea what was going on. I did not know why I was being interrogated. And basically, because there was a possibility of me seeing my uncle Dave, the leader of Scientology, in the hallway, I was often made to eat in the bathroom so that he didn't have to see me passing by in the hallway, so this wouldn't upset him. When I finished this interrogation and bathroom cleaning, basically, and they decided that I had come clean enough for up to their standards, whatever those were, they brought me to Los Angeles and said that my parents were leaving and that I was supposed to go with them. And at this point, I didn't even know my parents. I had never lived with them in a house ever in my entire life, except before I was 2 years old. I was also groomed to think that outside schools, schools that were outside of Scientology, they were basically drugged by evil psychiatrists. Scientology has huge issues with psychology and rage rage against it. And I basically thought I was going to be drugged. I was so behind in school at this point because I was only allowed to go to school 1 day a week. And by the way, never went again after I was 16. But all this is for another story. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when you take people away from their parents, their brothers, their sisters, for this much of their life, separating them physically, not allowing them to have contact, not allowing them to be nurtured by them, that I'm not saying that you can never be friends with your parents or you can never have a relationship with them, but you can never have that bond. That bond and those early years cannot be fixed in later years. You cannot replace the importance of early childhood nurturing and trust and being cared for and being looked out for. I'm sorry to say it so blatantly, but it is just a fact. It doesn't mean I don't love my parents. I do. It doesn't mean they aren't people that I have known my whole life. They are. It doesn't mean I don't know them more than many other people. And, especially my dad, he was there a lot more often than my mom. And so it's not about not being able to build a loving relationship or a friendship or a whole other relationship, but it is about attachment. And just the fact that I wanted to stay in Scientology when I was 16 years old illustrates this. It's that bond just wasn't there anymore. And I just want to make the gravity of this really clear that if you don't get that, then you can't get it. That's something that cannot be fixed. It's not something that can be given back to you or your parents. When I decided to stay in Scientology when I was 16 years old, I was required to do a Scientology course, where when I was doing it, I was kept alone in a room all day and with a video camera on me. And I was supposed to do this course, and it basically teaches you how anybody who leaves Scientology or who is a critic of Scientology is a suppressive person and they're terrible and you need to disconnect from them or else you will be sick, you won't do well, and you will become a danger to Scientology. And this was basically grooming me that my parents were terrible people and I should never speak to them. And so once I got through that course, basically I was never allowed to answer the phone on the base. Like from when I was 16 until I was 18, I was not allowed to pick up the phone and answer it in case it was my parents calling for me. All of my letters, even the ones from the mail pack, were intercepted by the RTC representative, who was the senior most official on the base, and she would read them before I would get them, including from my friends or if a letter came in from my parents. The letters that I did get from my parents that Scientology felt that I needed to see were handed to me by either the senior RTC official or by Marty Rathbun, who was the second in command of all of Scientology. And he would give me the letters to read in front of him and then take them away. When my book came out in 2013, Scientology made some comment on it that was like, we do not choose how parents choose to raise their children or something like that. But the point that I want to make, I know I already made it, but once again, is that all of this took place on Scientology bases, on Scientology property. I was considered an employee of the Church of Scientology. We were taken care of / not taken care of by employees of Scientology. Scientology is responsible for this. And in many cases, including my own, my parents were also in Scientology and in the Sea Org as children and got the same treatment. So this is a Scientology problem. And I want to make sure that that's very clear. That doesn't mean that parents are alleviated of all responsibility, but the fact that this happens all the time in the Sea Organization shows that it's a Sea Organization and Scientology problem. This is only one small part of how Scientology harms children. I'm not even going into in this video of how they deprive kids of education, how they force them to do interrogations, how they force them to do manual labor. I will go into those things, but I'm not even bringing those points up in this video because I just want to highlight how important this part of it is. If this was the only thing Scientology did to hurt children, it would be terrible. There were about 80 kids at the ranch where I grew up. There was another ranch slash boarding school in Los Angeles, and there was another one in Clearwater, Florida. And I just want to make it clear that Scientology has issued no apologies, has made no amends, has made no effort to take any responsibility for any of these things. In fact, if people come forward and speak out about these experiences, Scientology punishes them by slandering them and by separating them from their parents or siblings or other family members that are still in Scientology. And especially if people have grown up in Scientology, if kids have grown up in Scientology, Scientologists are often the only connections they have. So this hurts their ability to get a job. Their lack of education hurts their ability to get a job. So they're adding insult to injury. Not only did they mess up these people's childhood, but they're hurting them on an ongoing basis when all they try to do is tell the truth. A big point that I want to make in this video is that Scientology isn't just a collection of silly beliefs that are cute or funny, that have to do with aliens or just things that weird celebrities believe in. This is an actually dangerous and abusive cult that harms children. And the celebrities that pay money into this cult, who are adults and who have access to the internet and all of these stories, including my book, which was a New York Times best-selling book, they have access to this information and they still choose to ignore it and pay money to Scientology and promote it. And that is not okay. And they are guilty by association. Tom Cruise isn't just weird. He actually doesn't see his kid as a result of Scientology. And that's not okay. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. Don't forget to check out Sins of Scientology on YouTube. And if you haven't already read my book, you can find it on Amazon. It is called Beyond Belief, My Secret Life Inside Scientology and My Harrowing Escape. All right, see you soon. Bye.